She whispered through tears. "Please don't kick me. I'm already hurt." The vampire nobles laughed. But the stranger in the corner, the one everyone feared, rose from the shadows. What the broken waitress didn't know, the vampire king himself had just claimed her as his. And he never breaks a vow. The wine glass shattered against Mara's cheek before she even saw it coming. Clumsy human filth. Lady Vesper's voice cut through the tavern like a blade. The vampire noblewoman rose from her velvet chair, her crimson eyes blazing with disgust. "Do you know how much that vintage cost? More than your pathetic life." Mara pressed her hand against her face, feeling the warm trickle of blood seeping between her fingers. The Bleeding Rose Tavern had gone deathly silent. Even the usual chatter of drunken vampires ceased as all eyes turned toward her. "I'm sorry, my lady," Mara whispered, her voice trembling. She dropped to her knees, frantically trying to gather the broken glass with shaking hands. "Please, I didn't mean to. The tray slipped. Sorry." Lady Vesper's laugh was sharp and cruel. She circled Mara like a predator. "You've ruined my dress with your incompetence. Do you know what we do to humans who waste vampire property?" Mara's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd worked at the tavern for 3 years. 3 years of insults, of being treated like she was less than nothing. But she had no choice. Her younger brother needed medicine, and jobs for humans in Duskvale, the vampire capital, were scarce. "Please," Mara breathed, still on her knees. A shard of glass had cut her palm, and fresh blood dripped onto the dark wooden floor. "I'll work double shifts. I'll pay for the wine. Just please." Lady Vesper's polished boot drew back, aimed directly at Mara's ribs. Time seemed to slow. Mara raised her arms instinctively, knowing it would do nothing to stop what was coming. She'd been kicked before. Last month, Lord Corvus had broken 2 of her ribs for bringing him the wrong bottle. She'd hidden the pain, kept working because losing this job meant losing everything. "Please, don't kick me," Mara heard herself say, the words tumbling out in a broken sob. "I'm already hurt." The boot stopped mid-swing. "Enough." The single word dropped into the tavern like a stone into still water. It wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made every vampire in the room go rigid. The temperature seemed to plummet. Mara looked up through her tears and saw him for the first time. He sat in the darkest corner of the tavern, a spot she could have sworn was empty just moments ago. He wore a simple black cloak, hood drawn low, but there was nothing simple about the presence that radiated from him. Even slouched in his chair, he commanded the room with an authority that made Lady Vesper's cruelty look like a child's tantrum. "My lord," Lady Vesper stuttered, her foot still frozen in the air. "I was merely disciplining." "You were about to strike a defenseless woman already on the ground." The stranger's voice was soft, almost gentle, but underneath it ran currents of something ancient and dangerous. "Is that what passes for nobility in my city now? My city?" The blood drained from Lady Vesper's face. She stumbled backward, her expensive shoes crunching on broken glass. Around the tavern, chairs scraped as vampires rose and bowed their heads. Some dropped to one knee. Mara's breath caught. She didn't understand what was happening, but every instinct screamed that this man was different, more terrifying than any vampire she'd ever served. The stranger stood, and shadows seemed to move with him. He was tall, with shoulders that suggested both grace and lethal strength. As he stepped into the dim candlelight, Mara finally saw his face beneath the hood. He was beautiful in the way that sharp things are beautiful, all carved angles and pale skin that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. His hair was black as midnight, falling to his shoulders. But it was his eyes that held her frozen, silver, like moonlight on water, ancient and sad and piercing all at once. Those eyes fixed on her, and Mara felt the world tilt. "Stand," he said quietly. Mara's legs wouldn't obey. She trembled there on the floor, blood still dripping from her palm and cheek, unable to move. The stranger. No, she understood now with growing horror. The The king crossed the distance between them in 3 smooth strides. He knelt before her, and the entire tavern gasped. The vampire king didn't kneel for anyone. Up close, she could see the weariness in his silver eyes, the weight of centuries pressing down on him. He studied her face with an intensity that made her feel transparent, like he could see straight through to her soul. "You're bleeding," he observed. His gloved hand reached toward her face, hovering just above her cheek. He didn't touch her, but she felt the coolness radiating from him. "What is your name?" "Mara," she managed. "Mara Thorne, Your Majesty." Something flickered in his expression, recognition, perhaps, or surprise. His hand dropped away, and he tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something only he could hear. "Mara," he repeated, tasting the name. Then he stood and turned to face the room. "This establishment is under my direct protection as of this moment. Any harm that comes to this woman will be considered a personal offense against the crown." Lady Vesper had gone white as bone. "Your Majesty, I didn't realize. I would never." "Leave," the king's voice cut through her stammering like winter frost. "All of you. This tavern is closed for the night." The nobles fled like smoke and wind, Lady Vesper practically running for the door. Within moments, only Mara and the king remained, surrounded by flickering candles and the lingering scent of spilled wine. Mara tried to stand, but her legs finally gave out. Strong hands caught her before she hit the floor. The king had moved faster than her eyes could follow. He lifted her as easily as if she weighed nothing, setting her gently in one of the velvet chairs. "You're trembling," he said. It wasn't a question. "I don't understand," Mara whispered. "Why would you? I'm nobody. Just a waitress." The king studied her for a long moment, and she saw something flash in those silver eyes. Guilt? Pain? Recognition? "Perhaps that's exactly why," he said softly. Then he straightened, his expression becoming unreadable once more. "You'll close the tavern tonight and report to the royal citadel at dawn tomorrow." Terror spiked through her. "Your Majesty, please, if I've done something wrong." "You'll serve as my personal attendant for 1 week." He moved toward the door, his cloak swirling around him like living darkness. "Failure to appear will result in consequences. Do you understand?" Mara's mouth went dry. She nodded, unable to form words. At the threshold, the king paused. Without turning back, he said, "Your brother's medicine will be delivered tonight. All expenses covered." Then he was gone, leaving Mara alone with her racing heart and 1,000 questions burning in her mind. She touched her cheek, where the glass had cut her. The bleeding had stopped, and impossibly, the wound was already beginning to close. What had just happened? And why did the vampire king's sad, silver eyes look at her like he'd seen a ghost? Mara hadn't slept. How could she? Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those silver eyes staring at her like she was a puzzle he desperately needed to solve. The royal citadel loomed before her now, all black spires and crimson banners snapping in the pre-dawn wind. Guards in midnight armor flanked the massive iron gates, their faces hidden behind helmets shaped like snarling wolves. "Name," one demanded, his voice hollow behind the metal. "Mara Thorne. I was summoned." The guards exchanged glances. Without a word, the gates groaned open, revealing a courtyard paved with stones that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. A woman waited just inside, tall, severe, with white blonde hair pulled back so tightly it made Mara's scalp hurt just looking at it. Her crimson dress marked her as high-ranking vampire nobility. "You're late," the woman said coldly. "I am Alara, the king's seneschal. Follow me. Touch nothing. Speak to no one unless directly addressed. And for the love of darkness, try not to humiliate yourself." They walked through corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly, lit by floating orbs of blue flame that cast everything in an eerie, dreamlike glow. Portraits of ancient vampires lined the walls, their painted eyes following Mara as she passed. "Why does the king want me here?" Mara asked quietly. Alara's jaw tightened. "That is not my concern," nor is it yours. You will serve, obey, and keep your human curiosity to yourself. They stopped before a door carved from what looked like solid obsidian. Alara knocked twice, a sound like bones striking stone. Enter, came that familiar voice from within. The room beyond was not what Mara expected. Instead of the dark, gothic chamber she'd imagined, it was almost comfortable. Bookshelves lined every wall, stuffed with volumes in languages she couldn't read. A fireplace crackled with blue flames. Large windows overlooked the city, currently shuttered against the approaching sunrise. The king stood by one window, his back to her. He'd shed the cloak from last night and wore simple black clothing, a shirt, pants, boots. Somehow, he looked even more dangerous without the royal trappings. Your Majesty, Alara said with a deep curtsy. The human is here. Leave us. Alara's eyes widened fractionally. My lord, protocol dictates. Leave us. The seneschal left, but not before shooting Mara a look that promised retribution if anything went wrong. Silence stretched between them. Mara's heart hammered so loudly she was certain he could hear it. Finally, the king turned to face her. In the firelight, he looked different, younger, perhaps, though she knew he was centuries old. The weariness in his eyes seemed even deeper than before. Are you afraid of me? He asked. The question surprised her. I'd be a fool not to be, Your Majesty. Something that might have been approval flickered across his face. Honest. Good. He gestured to a chair. Seat. Mara sat, perching on the edge like a bird ready to flee. The king remained standing, studying her with that same intense focus from the tavern. Do you know why you're here? He asked. To serve you. For a week. That's what I told you. I asked if you know why. Mara shook her head, confusion mixing with her fear. The king moved to a side table and poured 2 glasses of what looked like wine, one red, one a pale amber. He handed her the amber one. Drink. It's not blood, if that's what worries you. Just wine. She took it with trembling hands, but didn't drink. He returned to the window, his back to her again. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. 243 years ago, I killed someone. A human healer who begged me for mercy. He paused. Her voice sounded exactly like yours. Mara's blood turned to ice. Your Majesty, I don't understand. Neither do I, he turned, and the raw pain in his eyes made her breath catch. When you said those words last night, please don't kick me, I'm already hurt. It was as if the past came alive. The same words, the same voice, the same fear. I'm not her, Mara said quickly. Whoever she was, I'm not. I know that. He drank from his glass in one swallow. But I need to understand why you haunt me. Why, after centuries of trying to forget, you appear and make me remember. Mara set her untouched wine down with shaking hands. So this is, what? Penance? You're trying to make up for killing her by protecting me? Perhaps the king's laugh was bitter. Or perhaps I'm just a selfish creature hoping that by keeping you close, I can finally silence the screams that have echoed in my mind for 2 centuries. The honesty of it shocked her. This was the Vampire King, the most powerful being in Duskvale, and he stood before her looking lost. What was her name? Mara asked softly. The king's expression shuddered closed. That doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that you'll stay here, in the palace, under my protection. You'll learn proper etiquette, serve in my household, and he trailed off, looking almost uncertain. And perhaps I'll find whatever absolution I'm seeking. And if I refuse? You won't. It wasn't a threat, just a statement of fact. Your brother received his medicine last night. He'll continue to receive it, along with food, firewood, and anything else he needs. All I ask is 7 days. 7 days to what? Mara wanted to ask. 7 days to ease his guilt? 7 days to prove she was just a human girl with an unfortunate voice. Or 7 days to uncover something neither of them was ready to face. I'll stay, she whispered. The king nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Good. Alara will show you to your quarters. We begin tomorrow. Mara stood to leave, but at the door, she paused. Your Majesty? The woman you killed. Did she forgive you? The king's silver eyes met hers, and in them she saw an abyss of regret. I never gave her the chance. The palace was a maze of whispers and sideways glances. Mara had been here 3 days, and every moment felt like walking on broken glass. The other servants, all vampires, made their disdain clear without saying a word. They'd hand her the heaviest trays, give her impossible tasks, then watch with cold satisfaction as she struggled. The king wants fresh nightshade tea, a servant named Dorian said, smirking as he thrust a silver tray into her hands. From the garden. Pick it yourself. And don't touch the moonflowers. They're worth more than your entire bloodline. Mara took the tray, without complaint. She'd learned quickly that arguing only made things worse. The palace gardens were beautiful in a haunting way, all silver leaves and flowers that bloomed only in darkness. She found the nightshade easily enough, its purple blooms almost black in the starlight. As she plucked the leaves carefully, a voice made her jump. You're doing it wrong. Mara spun to find the king standing behind her, so quiet she hadn't heard him approach. He wore simple dark clothing again, no crown, no royal regalia. In the moonlight, he looked almost human. Your Majesty, she started to curtsy, nearly dropping the tray. He steadied it with one hand. You'll bruise the leaves if you grip them like that. Here, his cool fingers covered hers, guiding her to pinch the stem instead. Gently, like handling something precious. His touch sent a strange shiver through her. This close, she could see faint scars on his hands, unusual for a vampire who should heal perfectly. Why do you have scars? The question slipped out before she could stop it. The king's hand withdrew. Some wounds refuse to heal, even for my kind. He plucked a few nightshade leaves with practiced ease, adding them to her tray. Who sent you for this?
Dorian, Your Majesty.
A muscle tightened in the king's jaw. I don't drink nightshade tea. It's toxic to vampires. He took the tray from her completely.
Come.
You'll dine with me tonight.
What?
No, I couldn't possibly. That wasn't a request, Mara. The king's private dining room was smaller than she'd expected, intimate even. A table set for 2, covered with dishes that made her stomach growl, fresh bread, roasted vegetables, fruit she'd never seen before. Real human food. Sit, he said, pulling out a chair for her. Mara sat, feeling completely out of place. The king took the seat across from her, but his own plate held only a single crystal glass of dark red liquid. You're not eating? She asked. I don't eat. Not anymore, he gestured to her plate. But you should. You've lost weight since arriving. The servants are cruel to you. It wasn't a question. Mara picked up her fork, suddenly self-conscious. I can handle it. You shouldn't have to, he leaned back, studying her in that intense way that made her feel transparent. Tell me about yourself, Mara Thorne. Who were you before the tavern? Nobody important. Just a girl from the border towns who needed work. Your brother, what's his name?
Finn.
He's 12. Caught fever last winter, and his lungs never recovered. She took a bite of bread. It was fresh, still warm, better than anything she'd tasted in years. This food. It's too much. You don't need to. I do. Actually, the king's voice was quiet. You're under my protection, which means you're under my care. That includes ensuring you eat properly. They sat in silence for a moment. Mara ate while the king watched, and surprisingly, it didn't feel uncomfortable. There was something almost
peaceful about it.
Why did you really bring me here? She asked finally. The truth, not the explanation about guilt. The king turned his glass slowly, the blood inside catching the candlelight. Do you believe in reincarnation, Mara? The question caught her off guard. I don't know. Maybe. I didn't. Not until I heard your voice. He looked up, his silver eyes holding hers. But now I'm not so certain. There are too many similarities. Your voice, your mannerisms, even the way he stopped abruptly. The way I what? Nothing. Forget I spoke. But Mara couldn't forget. She set down her fork. Your Majesty, if you think I'm this woman reborn, I need to know. What happened to her? How did she die? The king's expression turned to stone. That's not a conversation for tonight. Then when? You brought me here to answer questions, but you won't answer mine. A sharp knock interrupted them. Alara entered without waiting for permission, her face pale. My lord, the council demands an audience. They've heard rumors about the human in the palace. They're displeased. The king rose, his demeanor shifting instantly from contemplative to commanding. Let them be displeased. I answer to no 1 inch. They're invoking the ancient codes, Your Majesty. They claim you're showing favoritism that endangers vampire society. Alara's eyes flicked to Mara with barely concealed disgust. They want her removed. By force, if necessary. The temperature in the room dropped. Shadows seemed to gather around the king like living things. Tell the council, he said, his voice deadly soft, that Mara Thorne remains under my protection. Anyone who touches her will answer to me personally. Alara bowed and left, but her departure felt more like an escape. Mara stood on shaking legs. Your Majesty, I don't want to cause problems. If the council, the king interrupted, has forgotten that I am not merely their king, I am their creator. Let them try to remove you. They'll remember why they fear me. But as Mara looked into those ancient silver eyes, she realized something that terrified her more than the council's threats. The vampire king was protecting her at the cost of everything. And neither of them understood why. Mara couldn't sleep. Again. The room the king had given her was far too luxurious for someone like her. Silk sheets, enchanted windows that let in sunlight without burning the vampires outside, shelves lined with books. But luxury didn't quiet the questions spinning through her mind. She threw off the covers and padded to the window. The palace gardens stretched below, silver and ethereal under the full moon. And then she heard it, music, faint and haunting, drifting up from somewhere in that maze of shadows and starlight. A melody that tugged at something deep in her chest, like a memory she couldn't quite grasp. Before she knew what she was doing, Mara had slipped on her robe and crept out of her room. The palace hallways were empty at this hour, lit only by those floating orbs of blue flame. She followed the music like a thread pulling her forward, downstairs, through corridors, until she found a door she'd never noticed before. It opened silently at her touch. The garden beyond was unlike the others, wilder, more secret. And at its heart, surrounded by flowers that glowed like captured moonlight, knelt the vampire king. He was singing. The song had no words, just a melody so beautiful and sad it made Mara's throat tight. His hands moved among the flowers, the moonflowers Dorian had warned her about, tending them with a gentleness that seemed impossible from a creature of such power. Mara meant to leave, to back away before he noticed her intrusion. But her lips parted, and without thinking, she began to hum along. The king froze. Slowly, he turned to face her, and the expression on his face made Mara's breath catch. He looked stricken, like she'd reached into his chest and squeezed his heart. How do you know that song? His voice was barely a whisper. I don't. Mara's hand flew to her mouth. I've never heard it before, but somehow I just
knew.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't have followed you. I'll go. No, the king stood in one fluid motion.
Stay.
Please. The please stopped her more than any command could have. He approached her slowly, as if she might vanish like smoke. In the moonlight, with silver flowers glowing around him, he looked almost otherworldly, beautiful and terrible and heartbreakingly lost. She used to sing that song, he said quietly, while she worked, while she healed the wounded from my wars.
It was her lullaby, she said,
passed down through generations of her family. Mara's heart hammered. The healer you killed. Yes, the king reached out, his fingers hovering near her cheek, but not quite touching, just as he'd done in the tavern. Her name was Alira. She had your voice, your eyes, that same storm gray color, even the way you tilt your head when you're thinking. That's impossible. People can look similar, but… She had a scar here. His finger traced a line just above Mara's collarbone, not touching but showing. From a childhood accident. A crescent moon shape. Mara's hand went automatically to her collarbone. To the birthmark she'd had since birth. A crescent shape, pale against her skin. She'd always thought it looked like a scar. The king's eyes closed. Stars above, he breathed. It's not just similarity. You are her. I'm not anyone but myself. Mara stepped back, her mind reeling. I don't have her memories. I don't know anything about healing or wars or… The moonflowers, the king interrupted, gesturing to the glowing blooms around them. What do they tell you? They're just flowers. Look at them. Really look. Mara did. And something strange happened. The flowers seemed to pulse with light, and suddenly she knew without knowing how, that they only bloomed under the full moon, that their petals could cure blood poisoning, that they needed soil mixed with silver dust and water from deep wells. Knowledge that wasn't hers flooded her mind. She gasped, stumbling backward. The king caught her, his arms steadying her. Impossible, she whispered. I'm a tavern waitress. I don't know about healing plants. I don't. Your soul remembers what your mind has forgotten. The king's voice was rough with emotion. Alira was a gifted healer, the best I'd ever encountered. She saved hundreds of my soldiers' lives during the Crimson Wars. And I, his jaw clenched. I killed her because I was angry, because I was arrogant, because one moment of rage destroyed something irreplaceable. Tears burned Mara's eyes.
Why?
What did she do? She tried to save an enemy soldier. A human who'd attacked one of my generals. The king's grip on her arms tightened, though he was careful not to hurt her. I ordered her to let him die. She refused. Said all lives were sacred. So he closed his eyes. I lost control. By the time my rage cleared, she was on the ground, bleeding, begging me to stop. And then she was gone. The garden spun around Mara. She pulled away from him, hugging herself against the sudden cold. So, what am I to you? Her voice cracked. A second chance? A way to ease your guilt? Do you expect me to forgive you for something I don't even remember? I don't expect anything. The king looked at her with those ancient, weary eyes. I just needed to understand.
Why you haunt me?
Why, after centuries, you came back. He turned away. Now I know. Fate is crueler than I imagined. Mara's hands trembled. Part of her wanted to run, to escape this garden and this impossible revelation. But another part, a part that hummed that melody without being taught, that knew the secrets of moonflowers, wanted to stay. Show me, she heard herself say. Show me who I was. The king looked back at her, surprise flickering across his features. Are you certain?
No.
She wasn't certain of anything anymore. But she nodded anyway. The council chamber was a cathedral of shadows and ancient power. 12 vampire elders sat in a semicircle of throne-like chairs, their faces pale and severe in the crimson light of blood-flame torches. Behind them, carved into black marble, were the names of every vampire king who'd ruled Duskvale for the past 3,000 years. Lucian Draven's name was carved deepest of all. Mara stood in the center of the chamber, feeling like prey surrounded by predators. The king stood beside her. Not behind, not ahead, but beside, and that simple positioning had caused a ripple of shock through the assembled elders when they'd entered. This is unprecedented, Elder Corvus said, his voice like grinding stone. He was the oldest among them, with eyes like dead coals. A human brought before the council. A human living in the royal wing. A human who has clearly enchanted our king. Choose your next words carefully, Corvus. The king's voice was deceptively soft. You're accusing your sovereign of being weak-minded. I'm accusing this girl of using forbidden magic, Corvus shot back. He gestured to the other elders. We all see it, your majesty. Your behavior has changed since she arrived. You defend her publicly, dine with her privately, give her luxuries reserved for nobility. This isn't merely favoritism, it's obsession. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Elder Moira leaned forward, her silver hair catching the light. The ancient codes are clear, my lord. Humans serve. Vampires rule. This separation maintains order. By elevating this girl, you upset the balance that has kept our society stable for millennia. Stability built on cruelty, the king countered. Built on treating thinking, feeling beings as cattle. Perhaps it's time for that balance to shift. The chamber erupted in angry voices. He's been corrupted. The human must be using blood magic. This is precisely what the codes warn against. Mara's nails dug into her palms. She wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor and never face these accusatory eyes again. But the king's hand found hers, his cool fingers threading through her trembling ones. Every elder went silent at the gesture. Enough, Elder Corvus said, his voice sharp with authority. We invoke the right of trial. Let the girl prove she has not used forbidden magic to corrupt our king's mind. You have no authority to, the king began. The codes grant us this right. Corvus stood, his ancient power filling the room like a suffocating weight. Or have you forgotten the laws you swore to uphold? Even the king answers to the codes when corruption is suspected. Mara felt the king's hand tighten around hers. He was trapped, bound by the very laws that gave him power. Fine, he said through clenched teeth. Conduct your trial. But know this, if any harm comes to her, codes or not, I will end you. The threat hung in the air like a blade. Elder Moira stood as well, her expression calculating. Then let us begin. Girl, step forward. Mara's legs barely held her as she walked to the center of the chamber. The king released her hand reluctantly, his silver eyes promising violence if things went wrong. Remove your robe, Moira commanded. What? Mara's arms wrapped around herself instinctively. We must check for marks, runes, sigils, any evidence of dark magic. Heat flooded Mara's face. I'm not a witch. I don't have any.
Now, child.
Or we'll remove it for you. The king moved forward, but Mara held up a hand. If she let him fight every battle for her, the council would never stop. With shaking fingers, she slipped off her outer robe, standing in just her thin dress. The elders examined her like livestock, circling, scrutinizing. Mara kept her eyes fixed on the floor, humiliation burning through her. No marks, Moira admitted, sounding almost disappointed. Then it settled. The king started. Not quite. Corvus raised his hand, and purple energy crackled between his fingers. Marks can be hidden. We must test deeper. Corvus, no. The king lunged forward. The elder thrust his hand toward Mara, and purple lightning exploded from his palm. Mara screamed, throwing her arms up instinctively. She felt heat, smelled burning ozone, braced for agony. But it never came. Light erupted from beneath her dress, golden, pure, blinding. It radiated from her chest, forming a shield that not only stopped Corvus's attack, but sent it ricocheting back. The elder crashed into his throne with a roar of pain. The light faded, and something clattered to the floor.
A pendant.
Silver, set with a moonstone, hanging from a delicate chain. It had fallen from beneath Mara's dress, where it had always rested against her heart, a piece so familiar she'd forgotten she wore it. The chamber went deathly silent. Elder Moira approached slowly, her face pale. She knelt, picking up the pendant with trembling fingers. When she turned it over, Mara saw what had stolen the color from her face. Carved into the back was a crest, a moonflower wrapped around a sword. The House of Silvermoon, Moira whispered. This belonged to Elira, the king finished, his voice hollow with shock. He looked at Mara like seeing her for the first time. That was her family crest. She wore that pendant the day she died. I buried it with her myself. Mara's hand went to her chest, feeling the ghost of the pendant's weight. My grandmother gave this to me. She said it had been in our family for generations, that it would protect me when I needed it most. The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. "You're not just similar to Alira," the king said, wonder and grief warring in his expression. "You're her descendant. Her bloodline survived." "Impossible," Corvus spat, clutching his burned arm. "Alira had no children. She died unmarried." "She had a sister," Mara heard herself say, the knowledge rising from somewhere deep. "Younger. She escaped the capital when the purges began." The king's face went white. "What purges?" Mara's eyes met his, and suddenly she remembered. Not her own memories, but echoes, whispers passed down through generations of frightened women. "The ones you ordered," she whispered, "after Alira died. You were so consumed by guilt and rage that you hunted down everyone who'd witnessed what you'd done. Alira's entire family, executed for the crime of seeing the king's moment of weakness." The silence that followed was absolute. The king staggered backward as if she'd struck him.
"No."
I wouldn't." But the look in his eyes said he wasn't certain. And in that moment, Mara saw him not as a king or a protector, but as the monster her ancestors had fled. The palace felt like a tomb in the 3 days following the trial. Mara had been confined to her quarters for her own safety, though the locked door suggested otherwise. The king hadn't come to see her. No one had, except for silent servants who left food and refused to meet her eyes. She sat by the window, clutching the pendant that had rewritten everything. Her grandmother's final words echoed in her memory. "Keep this close, child. It holds our family's truth." She'd thought it was just an old woman's sentiment. She'd never imagined it was a warning. A key turned in the lock. Mara stood quickly as Alira entered, her face unreadable. "Come with me."
"Now."
"Where? Do you want to live? Then move." Something in the seneschal's urgency made Mara obey. They hurried through empty corridors, Alira leading her down passages Mara had never seen. Finally, they emerged onto a balcony overlooking the city. Duskvale was burning. Not with actual flames, but with chaos. In the streets below, humans and vampires clashed in violent skirmishes. Mara heard screams, saw figures running, watched as the fragile peace that had held the city together for centuries shattered like glass. "What happened?" Mara breathed. "You happened," Alira's voice was cold. Word spread about the trial. About a human wearing a noble vampire's crest. About the king protecting your bloodline, the same bloodline he once tried to destroy. The humans think you're a symbol of hope. The vampires think you're proof of the king's weakness. And now both sides are tearing each other apart. Guilt crashed over Mara like a wave. "I never wanted." "What you wanted is irrelevant." Alira pulled her back inside. "General Theron has been spreading poison in the king's absence. He's convinced half the court that His Majesty is unfit to rule, that human sentiment has made him soft. He's the one who leaked news of the trial to the human districts." "Why would he do that?" Alira's laugh was bitter. "Because Theron has coveted the throne for 2 centuries. He wants civil war. He wants the king distracted, weakened, vulnerable." She stopped before another door. "And he wants you dead." The door opened before Alira could knock. The king stood there, and Mara's breath caught. He looked haggard, shadows deep beneath his silver eyes. His shirt was torn, spotted with blood, his own or someone else's. She couldn't tell. "Leave us," he told Alira. The seneschal hesitated, then bowed and departed. The king's eyes found Mara's, and the pain in them was almost physical. "Is it true? The purges?" "I don't know," Mara admitted. "I only know the stories passed down. My grandmother's grandmother fled Duskvale pregnant with her daughter. She spoke of soldiers burning homes, of vampire hunters eliminating anyone who knew about Alira's death." She paused. "But stories can be exaggerated, twisted over time. Or they can be true." The king turned away, his hands clenching into fists. "I don't remember ordering it."
"But there are gaps."
"Weeks after Alira died, where my memory is nothing but rage and darkness. My advisors said I'd gone into mourning seclusion. But what if?" His voice cracked. "What if I did hunt them? What if I'm exactly the monster your family believes me to be? Mara wanted to comfort him. She also wanted to hate him. The conflict tore at her heart. It doesn't matter right now, she said quietly. People are dying because of me. Because of us. You need to stop this. I've tried. Neither side will listen, he looked at her, something desperate in his expression. But they might listen to you. Me?
I'm nobody.
You're Alira's descendant. You wear her crest. To the humans, you're proof that their bloodlines matter. To the vampires, he trailed off. A weakness to exploit, Mara finished. A bridge, the king corrected. Between two species that have forgotten how to see each other as anything but enemies, he crossed to her, taking her hands in his cool ones. I know I have no right to ask this of you. After what I did, what I may have done, to your family. But please, help me end this before Theron uses the chaos to take everything. Mara looked into those ancient, guilty eyes. She thought of her brother, safe because of this vampire's protection. She thought of Alira, whose voice somehow lived in her throat, whose pendant had saved her life. She thought of the pendant itself, glowing with light that had come from her. In the garden, she said slowly, when I looked at the moonflowers, I knew things. Healing things. What if that wasn't just memory? She pulled one hand free, holding up her palm. What if Alira's gift passed down too? Understanding dawned in the king's eyes. Your bloodline carries her healing magic. Maybe, Mara's heart raced with the possibility. Maybe I can't remember her life, but her power remembers me. If we go to the battlefield together, if we show them that human and vampire can work as one, that I can heal both sides. They'll kill you, the king's grip tightened. Theron will make certain of it. Then you'll have to keep me alive. Mara lifted her chin, surprised by her own courage. Because I'm not letting this city burn while I hide in a locked room. For the first time in days, something like hope flickered in the king's expression. You're certain?
No.
She was terrified, but she nodded anyway. Then we go together. The king released her hands and moved to a weapon rack, pulling down a sword that gleamed with silver fire. And may the stars have mercy on anyone who tries to stop us. As they prepared to leave, Mara touched her pendant one more time. Grandmother, she thought, I hope your magic is strong enough for this. Because she was about to walk into a war. The battlefield was a nightmare painted in moonlight and blood. The old cathedral ruins on the city's edge had become the epicenter of the violence, humans and vampires clashing among broken stone and shattered stained glass. Mara clutched the king's hand as they moved through the chaos, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break free. Stay close, the king commanded, his sword cutting through the air to deflect an attack neither of them had seen coming. A rogue vampire hissed and retreated into the shadows. They found the first wounded in what had once been the cathedral's nave, a human boy, no older than Finn, bleeding from a gash across his chest. A female vampire lay nearby, her arm twisted at an unnatural angle, burns covering her pale skin from some kind of magical fire. Help me, the boy gasped, reaching for Mara. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands hovering uselessly. I don't know how, I've never actually healed anyone. Yes, you have, the king knelt on the boy's other side. Your soul knows. Stop thinking. Just feel. Mara pressed her hands to the boy's wound and closed her eyes. At first, nothing happened. Then warmth bloomed in her chest, the same golden light that had protected her from Corvus's attack. It flowed down her arms, into her palms, into the boy's torn flesh. She felt his pain as if it were her own, felt the edges of the wound knitting together, cells rebuilding, blood vessels reconnecting. When she opened her eyes, the gash had closed to a thin pink line. The boy stared at her in wonder. You're really her. Alira reborn. I'm Mara, she said softly. But yes, I can help you. Can you walk? He nodded, stumbling to his feet and disappearing into the darkness. Mara turned to the vampire next. The woman watched her with wary crimson eyes. Why would you heal me? I'm the enemy. You're wounded, Mara reached for her arm. That's all that matters. The healing took longer. Vampire physiology was different, more complex. But slowly, the bones realigned. The burns faded. The vampire flexed her fingers in disbelief. I don't understand, she whispered. Humans don't have this kind of power. This one does, the king said. He looked at Mara with something that might have been pride. And she'll heal anyone who needs it. Human or vampire. Spread the word. They worked through the night, moving from one wounded to the next. Word did spread, slowly at first, then like wildfire. Fighters from both sides began bringing their injured to the cathedral instead of finishing them off. A fragile truce formed around Mara and the king, a small pocket of peace in the midst of war. But not everyone wanted peace. How touching. General Theron emerged from the shadows, flanked by a dozen armed vampires. He was tall, sharp-featured, with eyes like chips of black ice. The mighty king, reduced to playing nursemaid with a human pet. The king rose smoothly, his sword appearing in his hand as if by magic. Stand down, Theron. This ends now. You're right about that, Theron smiled, cold and cruel. The council has voted. You're deemed unfit to rule, compromised by human sympathy. I've been appointed as interim king until you can be properly removed. The council has no authority to. The council has every authority when their king has lost his mind. Theron's gaze slid to Mara. All because of one little human girl. Tell me, your majesty, is she really worth your throne? The king didn't hesitate. Yes. The word hung in the air, simple and absolute. Mara's breath caught. Theron's expression darkened. Then you've made your choice. Kill them both. The vampires attacked as one. The king moved like lightning, his blade singing through the air. But there were too many, and he was trying to protect Mara at the same time. A sword sliced across his shoulder. Another caught his leg. Mara screamed as the king went down on one knee, blood, actual blood, staining his clothing. Vampires didn't bleed easily. These were wounds that could actually kill him. No. She threw herself between him and the next attack, her hands outstretched. Golden light exploded from her like a shockwave. Every vampire was thrown backward, crashing into rubble and stone. The light didn't hurt them, but it held them frozen, unable to move. Mara's pendant blazed like a star against her chest, and she felt power flowing through her, not just healing, but protection, ancient magic responding to her desperation. Impossible, Theron breathed, struggling against invisible bonds. That's pure light magic. Humans can't. This one can, Mara said, her voice stronger than she'd ever heard it. She turned to the king, kneeling beside him. Let me help you. Mara, using that much power, you'll burn yourself out. I don't care. She pressed her glowing hands to his wounds. You said I was worth your throne. Well, you're worth my life. The healing was different this time, deeper, more intimate. As she knit his flesh back together, she felt something else flow between them, memories. Not hers, not quite his, but shared somehow through the magic. She saw Alira as the king had known her, laughing, healing, singing her lullaby. Saw the moment of his rage, the horrified realization of what he'd done. Saw him cradling Alira's body, screaming her name, begging her to wake up. And she saw what came after. 2 weeks of madness where he'd hunted down everyone who'd witnessed his shame. Not to silence them, but because their living eyes reflected his guilt back at him. He'd ordered the purges. He'd destroyed her family. But she also saw his 2 centuries of penance, the laws he'd changed, the humans he'd protected in secret, the nights he'd spent in that moon garden, tending flowers and singing a dead woman's song. Tears streamed down Mara's face as the last wound closed. I saw, she whispered. I saw everything. The king's silver eyes were bright with unshed tears. Then you know, I'm the monster you feared. You were, Mara said quietly. She touched his face, her palm against his cold cheek. But monsters don't spend centuries trying to atone. Monsters don't protect the descendants of those they've wronged. Monsters don't kneel before their victims and accept judgment. Mara, I forgive you. The words fell between them like a benediction. The king's eyes went wide, disbelieving. You can't, after everything I did. I forgive you, Mara repeated, stronger now. Not because you deserve it, but because Elira would have. Because carrying this guilt for 200 years is punishment enough. Because, her voice cracked. Because I think I'm falling in love with who you've become. The king stared at her. Then, impossibly, he began to glow. The light started from within, spreading outward like dawn breaking. Chains that Mara hadn't seen, spectral, ghostly things wrapped around his chest and arms, began to crack. They shattered in a burst of golden sparks, and the king gasped as if breathing for the first time in centuries. Behind them, someone whispered, Look, the mirror. Mara turned. In a shard of broken stained glass, she saw their reflection clearly. The king had a reflection again. 3 months had passed since the night the cathedral burned with golden light instead of blood. Mara stood in the garden behind her new inn, watching the sun rise over Duskvale. The city looked different now, softer somehow, as if the buildings themselves had relaxed. Humans walked the streets freely, and while tension still simmered, violence had become rare. The fragile peace was holding. The Crimson Dawn was painted in elegant script above her door, a name chosen deliberately. Crimson for the vampires, dawn for the humans, and the space between for everyone brave enough to bridge the gap. Inside, the morning shift was beginning. Mara had hired both species equally. Human cooks worked alongside vampire servers, and the menu offered food and various types of blood wine. It had been chaos at first, arguments erupting over the smallest things. But slowly, tentatively, they'd learned to work together. She heard footsteps behind her and smiled without turning. You're early, she said. The sun's barely up. I had the windows enchanted. The king, though he insisted she call him Lucien now when they were alone, stepped beside her. He wore simple traveler's clothes, the hood of his cloak thrown back. In the dawn light, he looked almost human. Couldn't sleep. Nightmares. Memories. But kinder ones than before. His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. It still sent a shiver through her, the coolness of his touch. The council meeting went late. Theron's trial is finally concluded. Mara tensed. And exile. 50 years in the Shadowlands, Lucien's voice was neutral, but she heard the satisfaction underneath. He'll have plenty of time to reconsider his ambition. After that night in the cathedral, General Theron had been arrested for treason. The evidence was overwhelming. He deliberately instigated the riots, armed both sides, and attempted to assassinate the king. The council, faced with Theron's plotting and the undeniable proof of Mara's healing magic, had been forced to reconsider their stance on human-vampire relations. It helped that Elder Moira had witnessed everything and testified on their behalf. Progress, Mara murmured. She squeezed his hand. Slow, but real. Thanks to you, Lucien turned to face her fully. In the 3 months since the curse broke, he'd changed in subtle ways. His reflection was the most obvious, but there was more. He smiled more easily now. Laughed, even. The weight of centuries seemed lighter on his shoulders. The inn is thriving. You've created something remarkable here. We've created it, Mara corrected. Your protection made it possible. Your resources built it. I just had the idea. And the courage to make it real. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. Elira would be proud. The name no longer hurt to hear. Mara had made peace with her ancestor's ghost, understanding that she carried Elira's magic and perhaps some echo of her soul, but she was still herself. Still Mara Thorne, who'd been a waitress and was now something entirely new. I received a letter from Finn yesterday, she said, changing the subject before emotion could overwhelm her. He's doing well at the academy. Top of his class in mathematics. He wants to visit next month. Lucien's expression softened. Finn had been one of his first projects after the battle, ensuring the boy received not just medicine but proper education. He's a brilliant child, like his sister. I'm not brilliant. I just stumbled into all of this. You walked into a war zone to heal your enemies. You forgave a monster who slaughtered your family. You built a bridge between two species who've hated each other for millennia. Lucien's silver eyes held hers. That's not stumbling, Mara. That's choosing grace over revenge. Every single time. Before she could respond, a commotion erupted from inside the inn. They hurried in to find a small crowd gathered near the entrance. A little girl, human, perhaps 5 years old, had tripped on the threshold and was crying, her knees scraped and bleeding. Her mother, a vampire, knelt beside her in distress. "Sweetheart, it's all right, Mama's here." Mara moved through the crowd and knelt beside them both. The mixed family wasn't uncommon anymore, but it still drew attention. She smiled at the little girl, whose tears had left tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "Hello there.
I'm Mara."
What's your name?" "Lila," the girl hiccuped. "That's a beautiful name." Mara looked at the scraped knee. "Minor, barely bleeding. That looks like it hurts. May I help?" Lila nodded, her lower lip still trembling. Mara placed her hand gently over the scrape. Golden light glowed softly. She'd learned control now, no longer needed dramatic displays. The wound closed, the pain vanished. Lila's eyes went wide with wonder. "Magic," she breathed. "Kindness," Mara corrected gently. She helped the girl to her feet.
"There.
All better now." But Lila was already pulling away, excited, reaching for something on the ground. She'd spotted a stray kitten and was chasing after it, the injury completely forgotten. She stumbled again, just a small trip, and started to tear up. Mara knelt once more, meeting those watery eyes. "Please don't cry," she said softly, brushing dust from the girl's dress. "You're not hurt anymore."
See?
"You're perfectly fine." The words echoed in her mind, an echo of another plea, in another time, that had changed everything. Lila sniffled, then smiled brightly, and ran off to play. Her mother touched Mara's shoulder. "Thank you for everything you've done for families like ours." When the woman left, Mara found Lucien watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. He stood in a patch of sunlight streaming through the enchanted window, something that would have destroyed him before the curse broke. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing." "Everything," he crossed to her, taking both her hands. "Just thinking how one moment of mercy can change the world. How one plea for compassion ended a kingdom built on cruelty. And began something better," Mara finished. "And began us." He pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. "I love you, Mara Thorne. Not because you're Illyria reborn, but because you're you. Because you chose forgiveness when you had every right to choose hate." "I love you too," Mara whispered. "Lucien Draven, vampire king, reformed monster, and the best man I know." His laugh was soft, disbelieving.
"I'm hardly."
She kissed him, cutting off his protest. His lips were cool but gentle, and she felt him smile against her mouth. When they parted, the inn had resumed its morning rhythm around them, humans and vampires working side by side, eating together, talking, laughing. Not perfectly. There were still arguments, still mistrust. But there was also hope. Through the window, Mara watched dawn fully break over Duskvale. The city that had once run red with blood now glowed gold with possibility. "Do you think it'll last?" she asked quietly. "This peace we've built." Lucien pulled her close, his arms around her waist. "As long as there are people willing to heal instead of harm, to forgive instead of destroy, to see each other as more than monsters or prey," he pressed a kiss to her temple. "So yes, as long as there are people like you in this world, I believe it will last." Mara leaned into him, feeling the steady presence of his embrace, the pendant warm against her heart. Somewhere, she thought, Illyria was smiling. The healer who died begging for mercy had returned, not as herself, but as something better, as proof that even the darkest curses could be broken by light. that even monsters could be saved, that even in a city of shadows, dawn always came. And in that dawn, holding the hand of a king who'd learned to be human again, Mara whispered the words that had become Duskvale's new legend. Once, a plea for mercy ended a kingdom of cruelty and began an age of peace.